The Honourable Member for Newton North Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to rise in opposition to the legislation that's here before us, Bill C-22. And it's called an Act Respecting Canada's Offshore Oil and Gas Operations, enacting the Nuclear Liability and Compensation Act, repealing the Nuclear Liability Act and making consequential amendments to other acts. And I suppose compared to some other names I've seen for other bills that are coming before this House, this one is not as reactionary or filled with volatility as another bill that was introduced here. Mr. Speaker, let me say that I have major concerns that here we are dealing with a piece of legislation that is critical, and I'm hearing that from colleagues on the other side. First, it takes them forever to bring the bill here. Forever. And they could have done this a long time ago. And then now to keep moving time allocations on it. So here we are once again speaking to a bill, one of 80 time allocations. 1 out of 80. This is just getting to be ridiculous, Mr. Speaker. And I'm urging my colleagues to take a look at that seriously. Not only have they placed time allocations in here, but at committee stage, they prevented a full array of experts and other witnesses coming forward to present testimony so that the legislation we have is well thought out and is based on the opinions of those who are in the field and talking with experts who know a lot more about this issue than many parliamentarians do in this House. And once again, Mr. Speaker, we as parliamentarians have been denied access to that kind of expertise and science. And knowing the allergic reaction that government has to science and expert opinion, I shouldn't really be surprised, but I am still very disappointed. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a number of times today that this bill is an improvement on what we have. I agree. This bill is an improvement on what we have. And you know, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely forgot to say that I will be splitting my time with my esteemed colleague, member for Nanaimo Cowichan. My apologies to her. Let me say that when I take a look at this bill, it has taken a long time for it to come here. And yes, these changes are long overdue, but once again, my colleagues across the way have failed to address fundamental issues that we need to address. I always hear from my colleagues how the US does. After all, if the US goes into dropping missiles in Iraq, we have to follow because we are very close friends with them. But when I look at this legislation, it seems in this case they are quite willing to ignore what the US is doing in this area and what other countries are doing. And let me just say, Germany, Japan, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Austria and Switzerland have unlimited liability for nuclear power plants. Unlimited. We're not talking about 1 or 2 countries. There's a series of countries here that I've listed. And then when you look at the US, our closest to us, border-wise, and this is what, once again, the Conservatives have set the bar even lower than the US. And Mr. Speaker, that causes me major concern. You know, when it suits us, we have to be like the US and we have to follow them here and there, but when it doesn't suit us, and when it actually concerns the pocketbooks of Canadians and our future well-being, then they are quite willing to look the other way. Even the US has standards much higher than the ones that are proposed in this bill. The US has absolute liability regime of 12.6 billion US dollars. 12.6 billion. Compare that to 1 billion. And I think we can all see, even my grandchildren in school would be able to see that there is a huge difference in there. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that if the companies are not paying, then guess who is? It's the taxpayers. And this government, who always talks about being good managers of our taxpayers' assets, in this case, are willing to land the taxpayers with billions and billions of dollars worth of liability. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, we're not just exaggerating. We just have to take a look at what has happened in the past, when it actually come to cleanup. And we do have some examples. It isn't as if we don't have any. When you take a look at the cost of cleanup around Japan's 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster, the Japanese government estimates that the cleanup for the nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi plant could be over $250 billion. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm not just grabbing those numbers out of the air. This is a country that has experienced that reality, and they are giving us their best opinion. They have already spent well over hundreds of billions. And here we are taking a look. They're saying $250 billion. So what do the so-called smart economic managers of our Canadian taxpayers do, sitting on the other side? They say a liability, total liability of $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, that does not speak well of being good managers of taxpayers' money. And, Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to see that there are some changes in this bill, and some of those include unlimited liability for gas and oil companies. And, you know, coming from the beautiful British Columbia and being very proud of our pristine coastline, we are very concerned. So we want to see obstacles in the way so that business community, the oil explorers, the companies will make sure will take every precautionary step possible to avoid a leakage or a spill or any other kind of a disaster. But, Mr. Speaker, surely if it's good enough for the oil and gas industry, it should be good enough for the nuclear industry as well. And I'm finding it very hard to get my head around this issue as to why here we are treating two industries so differently, and yet neither industry is a new industry. They're both well established. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I have to say at this stage that after years of experience as the Environment Minister in Quebec, I believe our leader, the NDP leader, knows environmental protection and sustainable development inside out, and I absolutely believe he would not support, nor would he bring forward such legislation that basically only had the companies involved in nuclear energy with a $1 billion liability. You know, subsidizing the most profitable industries in the country and leaving taxpayers on the hook for a massive nuclear disaster or oil spill doesn't make sense. And yet this government is doing exactly that. They are going against, I would say, the common sense, the nod test. I think if I was to go into a grade 5 class in my riding, and I was to put this forward to them, they would say, really? And they would say, that's not fair. And you know what? And I would say, this is not right. And that is what really concerns me. And I think that it's really shameful that we have a bill before us that does not put the interest of the taxpayers ahead of narrow corporate interests, because that's what we are seeing here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think I see you indicating that I'm running out of time, very short time. Well, Mr. Speaker, let me finish this way. I want to wish everyone in the House a happy and productive week in the ridings, and I know that all of us will be participating in our Remembrance Day ceremonies in our ridings, and they are always filled with, you know, pathos and sadness and memories. as we honor those. But this year, in light of events that we have personally experienced in here, they do take on a different level of pregnancy. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.